morning, everyone. Thank you for calling in. We'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes and to let people continue to sign on. Thanks.
She mused me. It's close. Oh, I had no idea.
I'm a vice president. That's my team. I like it all. They will keep.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Woody with the Division of Water Quality, and with me today is Jarma Bennett with the Office of Information Management and Analysis, or OIMA, at the State Water Board. Welcome to the webinar. Today we will show you how to use the 401 Certification Regulatory Measure Wizard to enter data into SWRCB. But before we get started, let's go over some ground rules. We'd like to go over, we have a number of people on the phone today, and because of that, each of us must try to eliminate unnecessary background noise so the group can hear the presentation. If you are not talking, please put your phone on mute. If you do not have a mute button on your phone, you can use *6 to mute and unmute your phone. But please feel free to ask questions that help you follow along and clarify something that I have said or that Jarma has said. If you have questions that are unrelated to the specific point that we are discussing, please wait to the end of the presentation to make sure that we have time to work through the core subject matter. WebEx also has a chat feature that allows you to type in a comment or a suggestion. If you are afraid that you'll forget your question or you don't want to interrupt, feel free to use the chat function. Be sure to send your chat to the host, and we can respond at the end of our time today. So the objectives of the webinar today is we're going to show you how to use the 401 Certification Wizard first we're going to talk through the process, and then we're going to have a demonstration. We will cover how to search and create party IDs. JARMA will introduce information on entering additional record types such as inspections, enforcement, violations, and amendments. If you're new to SWRCB, you may want to familiarize yourself with the process and some of the terms by looking at other data entry webinars and SWRCB's information. We'll cover some of the common troubleshooting for the wizard and questions, common questions. We'll get to your information. We'll talk about the information, how to get it out of SWRCB, such as running reports. And then at the end, we'll also talk about additional information, who to notify if you need help. And we'll also introduce or notify everyone that's in attendance today about a method called Wiki to address questions and comments about your issues with the wizard or any questions regarding your data entry. The SWRCB wizard, it's a set of screens or system of functionality to facilitate data entry. We build them to accommodate the usual situations while still allowing for flexibility to modify records for the unusual situations. While the wizard is called 401 certification wizard, it really handles a multitude of types of regulatory measures, such as certifications, enrollees under general orders, WDRs, that are related to the Wetlands and Certification Program. As you will see, the wizard requires that the applicant and the applicant contact records to exist in SWRCB already. The applicant is the organization that is responsible for the project, and the applicant contact is the representative from the organization that you can contact about the project. The wizard displays a session time. You'll see it on all of the screens in the wizard. And it gives you an hour. So when you are prompted to continue, you need to press continue if you have finished the hour so you do not lose the information that you've entered into the wizard. So next I'm going to go through a verbal description of the process. If you have so first, we have entering the party IDs. You have to have your party IDs in to get to the wizard. So it's always best to search somewhat broadly so you get a selection of possibilities and you can select one. After all the party IDs are entered and the regulatory measure type is selected, the wizard screen will come up and then you can complete the other fields. Before we demo the wizard, I want to talk to you about party IDs. We do not want to have duplicate parties in the system. So we always do the search first. There are naming conventions, and those can be also accessed through the business rules, and we'll introduce you to some common ones. The naming convention, for example, for Sacramento would be Sacramento City. If you're looking for Sacramento City's Department of Public Works, it would be Sacramento City DPW. Los Angeles would be Los Angeles City. So be sure to look at the naming conventions if you have questions about that. It's easily accessed through the top of the screen. There's a little section there that says help and you can access business rules. When you're finished creating the party record, be sure to make a note of the party ID number. Jarma's going to take you through a demo and demonstrating the certification wizard.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Here we have up on our screens the information that was provided, much of the information that was provided in this certification that we are entering. You can see that our applicant is Windsor. We have our applicant contact, Alejandro Perez. We have our staff person, information about our place, dates about the certification that was entered, and our fill and mitigation numbers that we'll need to enter into the wizard. And then at the end, we'll be sure to attach our document, our file, to the record. So now I'm going to skip over to SWRCB, and here's our login page. I am going into the test environment because while I am using a real 401 certification as an example, I think it's already in there, so we don't want to be putting fake data in our production system. So when I log in, I get my main menu, and you may have fewer or more menu items than you see here, depending on your user rights. So to go to the 401 Regulatory Measure Wizard, I go to the Create Maintain Regulatory Measure module. You see at the top, you have the option to launch the Regulatory Measure Wizard, and when you go to that option, you have several different ways in which you can do that. And we're demonstrating today the 401 specific one, and I'll go into that. Here you see that there are actually two options, one for an Excel upload and one for 401 Certification Wizard. The Excel upload is an additional tool for uploading a large amount of data. We're not going to cover that today, but you can find more information about this tool on the SWRCB intranet site. For this demonstration, as I said, we're going to go into the 401 Certification Wizard. And here's our first screen to actually enter in data. As Catherine mentioned, we get the time remaining in our session, so you know how long you have before you have to communicate with the database in order to keep your session active. The first thing we do is enter our applicant. We have the option of just entering a party ID, which is the unique identifier associated with each type of record in SWRCB. And if you happen to know that because maybe you just entered it, you can type it in. In our case, we don't know it. We're going to search for it. So we click the button to initiate a party search. And in our example, we have that the town of Windsor is our applicant. So we're just going to type in Windsor and search. And we see we get our list back. I'm going to try to center a little bit more. List back of parties that match this search. And we see that the last one, Windsor Town, fits our criteria. So we're going to hit select.
I'm not seeing that on the screen.
And you may have to scroll down in the window. I'll try to move mine up. Depending on your resolution, I believe it makes what you can see bigger or smaller. Are you able to scroll down and see it?
I'm just seeing how will this new 401 certification be created, Excel upload, or 401 certification wizard?
Is anybody else seeing the party search screen?
Yes, I'm seeing the proper screen. It sounds like his computer froze on him.
Yeah, I see the screen.
Yeah, I see the screen. Yeah, mine froze earlier and I had to restart it.
Oh, great.
Sorry about that. We are recording this. As Erin said, we're recording it, so it'll be available, and hopefully you'll be able to log back in and catch up with us. So we're going to go ahead and hit select corresponding to the row that says Windsor Town. When I do that, the party ID pops in there, and I can go on to the applicant contact. In this example, the applicant contact is Alejandro Perez. I'm going to search for that person. I'm going to do a broad search and just do Perez. So again, as Catherine highlighted, we don't want to have duplicates. And so to be as broad as possible, we search broadly. So in this case, it's just by the last name. And we do get a number of results. I'm going to show all of the results at once. And just eyeing down the list.
Excuse me, this is Kim Sanders. Can you go back one screen and just say again why you had to look for Perez as opposed to, since you were already into the Windsor project?
Okay.
Do you mind?
Yeah, no, that's, actually so far I've just said that we didn't go into the Windsor project. It's just saying that I'm attaching that party that already exists, the town of Windsor, that exists in SWRCB, that it's going to be attached record. It doesn't necessarily pull in anybody else or make a smaller universe of people attached to it. It's still, I'm still searching for my applicant party among all parties in all persons in SWRCB. And so I did have the person's first name, and I could have searched on their whole name to see if I get anything. We like to be cautious, I guess, and do a broader search. So I just searched for his last name, and I'm not finding it here. And so I'm going to have to go and create that party in SWRCB because according to my search, he doesn't already exist as a person in SWRCB already.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead, since I didn't find what I'm looking for, I'm just going to close this window and use my right mouse button option to open a new tab. I'm going to keep my first session active. And so it's going to continue to count down, but I think I can work fast enough to go into another tab and go to create maintain parties. And as we just went through the search on the last name, we didn't find anything that was even close to Alejandro, so I know that I can create a new party. So I click the create a new party button. I'm creating a person, and then I can type in his first name, Alejandro, and tab over and his last name, and then go down to the mailing address, or the address type, and select mailing. And it's
just a quick question about using the staff person for the party. Is the party actually City of Windsor, or is it the individual staff person?
There's actually 3 different parties that we were talking about here. I'm going to go switch back to my PowerPoint presentation quickly. So here we see the applicant, and that has to be an organization. In this case, it's the town of Windsor. And then we have the applicant contact. That's a person. That's also considered a party. Step back a second. Parties in SWRCB are either persons or organizations. And so our first one, the applicant, is an organization. The next one, the applicant contact, is the discharger representative, and or the person who's doing the project, that person who represents the organization that's doing the project. So that's Alejandro Perez, a person. And then we have staff, and that's regional board staff. And so that's also a person. Again, parties in SWRCB are either persons or organizations. Does that clarify what we're doing?
And so each one of those people or organizations gets their own ID number?
Yeah. Each party gets their own ID number, and again, it can be either a person or an organization.
So like for Windsor, you'll have one number for Windsor and then multiple numbers for different employees who we deal with.
Right.
Okay.
So here we are back at our creating a person, specifically a party screen, and we have a P.O. box number, and that's in Windsor, California. What is that? 95492, and we actually, there wasn't provided any additional contact information, so we're going to save that. We have an additional feature in SWRCB where the computer does the search for a similar party. You know, I did go through the search before, so I'm not surprised we don't find, the computer didn't find a duplicate, but it's, again, another protection against creating duplicates. So once I've done that, I now have my applicant contact, Alejandro Perez. I'm going to copy his party ID, as was just pointed out. Each new party, either organization or person, gets their own party ID. Here I'm copying the one that it was just created, Control-C. And now I'm going to go back to my wizard entry and paste that right in to the applicant contact party ID field. You can see now we have two different IDs listed here for those two different parties, and now I'm going to just do a search for this regional board staff person that's working on this project, and that's Stephen. And hopefully all the staff people are already in here, so it'll be a quick search. And I see that he is, and I can just barely get the select there. And now I have my 3 different party IDs for my 3 different parties, and I'm going to select my regulatory measure type. And in this case, we're entering a 401 certification. As Catherine mentioned, we could also be doing an enrollee under a general order or general certification. If I did select that option, then another new field would pop up where I'd get an opportunity to select the general order or general certification which the enrollee is being covered by. And then you also have the option of entering the WDR. In this case, again, we're doing the 401 certification. So I'm going to click the Continue button. And here we get additional fields to fill out, and this is really what gets the meat of the regulatory measure that we're creating. But you see in the top has changed a little bit. It still has our IDs, but it makes sure, it shows you what parties those represent, so you know you've selected the right ones. Moving down to the place name, according to our information, we're titling our place Shiloh Road at Pruitt Creek. And because this doesn't really describe too much as to where it is, you can use the place description field to say more about where it is so you can find it. So it's Shiloh Road between Highway 101 and Condy Lane. And again, I got that information from the certification. The regional board is the North Coast region. Then you have an opportunity to enter a latitude and longitude as provided by the cert. We have 38.5257, .59, and then our longitude is negative 122.7. We do have these show map features. If you knew visually where the point was and weren't provided the coordinates or wanted to check the coordinates, you could click on that, the show map links, and a Google map essentially would pop up, and you could actually type in an address or just pinpoint it on the map, and you can set those coordinates instead of typing them in as I just did. We were not provided an APN number in our certification, so we're going to skip on down to place type. It's a dredge/spill site, and then we'll move on into the address information. I noted minute ago, we don't really have a traditional address for this site, and that's why I added more to the description field. And so mostly I'm going to skip these first fields and go down to the city, and we do know that it's in Windsor and that the county is Sonoma. We'll select that. Moving on down, we get into our regulatory measure information. We have our description that this is roadway improvements. You can go on and describe more exactly what's happening as your cert is certifying, but just to keep it simple, generally what is going on with this project is roadway improvements. Now we go on to regulatory measure status, and we're going to say, in this case, we're entering in a regulatory measure that's already been issued and is active. So we're going to pick that. However, you do have some other choices here. You can enter in that once it's already had gone through its process and is no longer active, it would be historic. Then you have a couple different statuses that are specific to 401 certifications, and that's denied or denied without prejudice. If you had an application that you had to deny or deny without prejudice, you can go ahead and enter in the information, but then pick one of these two options, whichever one is appropriate, and it'll still be recorded in CWICS, which is important to kind of be able to track your program. And then you also have to withdraw, and if for some reason the application was withdrawn, you can enter that in. Again, for our situation, we're picking active, and we don't have an order number in this case for the certification. You get a question if it was state board issued, and it was not. For those that state board is issuing, they would then pick yes, and it does change the links a little bit as according to our business rules.
Jarma?
Yes.
For the description, what's the limit on the number of characters in that box?
I believe it's 2,000.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So then we get a bunch of identifiers, and again, enter as many as you are appropriate, as many as are either provided in the certification or that are known and assigned to this case. You can put in the WDID, which we have, and the U.S. Army Corps file number. And
I can't see my screen anymore, but is there a provision for like region-specific ID numbers?
The file number that's listed there, that's kind of our generic identifier, and that's what you would put as your region-specific. If you used a different type of identifier that's not listed there, the file number would be the appropriate one to put that in.
As our computers in Region 2, all of us are having this session crash out on us periodically. But is there CEQA clearinghouse number 2?
Yes, and that's a great timing because I just entered that in, so I want to point that out. If you do have your CEQA clearinghouse number, there's a CEQA number field right here on the screen, and I just entered that. So you can enter that, and then that'll allow you to search on that later once it's in CWICS. If you know that and you're trying to look for the record, you can search by that number. Now we're on to effective date, and this is the date that the certification was issued. And in this case, it was in March 30th of this year.
What is the WDID number?
What's the question?
What is the WDID number?
The WDID number is the Waste Discharger Identification Number, and it's a common identifier that's used throughout the water boards for those regulatory measures that are billed annually. It's a requirement. At this point, most records associated with the Wetlands and Certification Program aren't billed annually, but it's still used by some regions. And if you guys do get to a point where you are billing annually, that will be a required number.
Excuse me, I must have missed. What is the file number under WDID number?
The file number is a kind of your miscellaneous identifier. We do have several identifiers that are specific, the WDID, the CEQA number, and then we have kind of your generic, it could be a region-specific number, it could be some other number that you want to record. It's just kind of a miscellaneous identifier that to allow people some flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
So then, like say this is Region 1, the WDID number that they've assigned to their project is the one you've put in there, or is that something that's specific to CWICS?
No, the WDID number has been used long before CWICS, and the one that I typed in here was the one that the Region 1 assigned to the certification. When I picked up the certification, it was right there on the front page, and so I entered it in.
Okay. Thanks.
So the program will automatically know if your region requires it or not? Like you won't get to the bottom of the screen, it'll say you have to fill this number in? Because I don't think we use these numbers. I'm in Region 3.
Okay, yeah, no, the required fields are marked with the red asterisk, and so you won't get to the bottom and have that say that's a required field. Then you also see there's the effective date, which I'm on now. It pops up with the note effective date is required for the regulatory measure status of active or historical. So
yes,
we have the two different signs, the asterisk, meaning it's required no matter what. Then we have the pound sign, which are conditionally required fields. And so something has to be a certain way in order for it to be required. And in this case, for the effective date, it's that it is the specific status noted. But the other fields are not required. And so you won't get to the bottom and say, not be able to complete it without any of them.
Thank you.
And we have a bunch of dates. And we don't actually, from the certification that I picked up, we don't have too many of them. We do have the public notice date. And it's 02/28/2011, and so again, if you know these dates, you should enter them. And the other two ones, fields that aren't dates are numeric values for monetary values, and one for the amount received as part of the application. And then the other one is the dredge fill fee, which is, again, if the regulatory measure was being billed annually, you would need to put that value in of what the annual fee should be, so that CWICS knows and then gets transferred to our billing system. Those systems know what should be printed on the invoice. But in this case, we're assuming it's not being billed annually. So that's kind of the administrative part of it. Now we get to move on to the impacts part. And it's displayed here in a tabular format. And we have our dredge information first, and we get down to our fill information. Both have temporary and permanent sections to the table. We're going to continue down a little bit so we can see our fill information. In our example, we have permanent stream bed fill, and so we're going to find that set of boxes, and we know that it's 0.044 acres, and also 182 linear feet. Now, you want to make sure even though both of these numbers represent the same actual disturbance, they're in different dimensions and units. As much as you know, put in. And so that gives us a better idea, or the program a better idea of what's going on in the ground, and we can report out that information. So if you also knew what that translated to in cubic yards, given the project information, you could put that in too. Then we have a couple questions. Is this a restoration project? In this case, it's no. This is another good, helpful piece of information to the program. Then, is compensatory mitigation required? You have a yes, no box, if I push no, that second table disappears, but in this case, the mitigation is required. And so I'm going to keep it on yes and fill out my mitigation. That's, again, part of the certification. And they're going to do a bank and we have that it's in acres, and they're going to establish 0.12 acres of, oops, here. It's actually a stream bed, I assume. So you want to be careful. They do look very similar, and so you do want to put it in the right one. Sorry about that. And the right number. So again, if they had a different dimension available, you'd put as many of those of the late acres or linear feet that you knew according to what's been certified. And finally, we get to say create the 401 certification regulatory measure. And once we push that button, we get to our regular regulatory measure screen with all of the fields, the required fields filled out and the links made. We see that it's a 401 certification. It has a title in our standard format. And when we scroll down, we see it's linked to the place that we created and the organization that we selected. It has all the identifiers that we typed in and has our effective date and expiration date. I do want to skip over to the attachments tab because we need to upload our final document. So
can I ask a couple questions before we move on?
Sure.
Okay, you had the button, is this a restoration project?
Yes.
What will happen if you click that button?
Nothing changes with the screen that you see, but it's information for the program to know what maybe Catherine can speak more to that.
If it's a restoration project only, then there wouldn't be mitigation required for that project. So it allows us to flag that project so that when we do the reporting and report out, we're not going to have a situation where we show impact but we don't have mitigation for it. So we separate those particular restoration projects from the main part of the reporting, and we can do a separate report for the restoration projects only.
Okay, so for those projects, we wouldn't be logging impacts and mitigation in that conventional way.
You would still log it in, but if it's restoration only, you can put in the impact for the restoration project if there's impacts, but it will pull out from the reporting when we do our reports so that it doesn't show, it will separate them out so that they aren't included as just impacts and no mitigation.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
My other question is, for temporary impacts that will be regraded, reseeded, and restored, do we also show that in the mitigation?
No, we aren't putting in, those are basically BMPs or restoring the site to its original contours. We aren't really tracking the BMPs.
So should we not be counting those temporary impacts in the impacts area, or?
No, we do include the temporary impacts.
So I think if we do that, then it will show that we are losing when you run the reports, if we don't count them as mitigation.
If you're comparing temporary impacts to permanent, but
there isn't any place to record the other.
Are you just?
So I think for that particular situation, I think for now, go with what Catherine said. We'll verify that when the reports get pulled out and what would end up being shown against each other, if it would be temporary impacts versus permanent mitigation or not. So that's a good question.
I think, in my experience, usually the mitigation package is supposed to account for both permanent and temporary impacts. And we don't always track which mitigation for which. We establish that there's mitigation necessary for both kinds, and then we come to an agreement on the total mitigation for both impacts.
Right, I think that's true. We do require some mitigation, that they need to restore or plant, revegetate. I just don't think that there's a good way to record that in the table unless we're putting it in as acres and linear feet, linear feet of re-veg area. But we'll look into that.
So, so when you, if it's a restoration project, will SWRCB allow you to put mitigation information in there in those boxes, or does?
Yes, the restoration question doesn't impact it doesn't lock down any fields, it doesn't make anything disappear, it's just a static question.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions at this time before we move on?
One last question, clarification. How do we log mitigation banks? They don't go into the restoration box, do they? In other words, they're banks, so we're not actually counting their creation as mitigation.
Yeah, we always have been tracking that at the state board, and that was actually the example that Jeremy used. It was it enhancement? Establishment of 0.12 acres to a midi-bank.
What would you do about existing waters at a mitigation bank versus what was created?
About purchasing credits for wetlands that have already been created?
No, just say like you had a 100-acre site and 10 acres were already wet, and they were going to turn the entire site into waters. So would you already have, would you put 10 acres into the preserved, and then enhanced would be 90?
I think we're going to kind of into the weeds of more programmatic stuff, and not that it doesn't come down to entering into SWRCB. So we have time at the end. We can try to adjust there, and also maybe we'll do a follow-up. Maybe program we'll focus more heavily on program and less on the SWRCB on a next future webinar.
I have a question. For the WDID number, when we set up the WDID number initially when the application comes in, it generates a reg measure ID. So then when we go in and launch the wizard, we don't have the option to search for that WDID number and pull out that reg measure. Otherwise, we would be creating essentially a duplicate reg measure ID.
Right. You don't want to do that. As soon as your application comes in, you can use the wizard at that time, or if you don't use the wizard, then but you put your application in, that's great, but don't go back and use the wizard. You just have to go through the regulatory measure screens and find that record and update it.
Okay, thank you.
But, yeah, that's a good catch. Thank you.
But can't you have more than 2 regulatory measure IDs per WDID?
The WDID should represent one project.
Yeah, but you can have the WID for a general construction permit. The applicant submits an NOI to be covered by the general construction permit, but at that same site, the applicant might need certification for new bridges and culverts.
And they get a separate WDID, and so one would go into SMART for the coverage under the stormwater program. One would go into SWRCB, as we're demonstrating today, for the certification or whatever regulatory measure you're issuing
So
at work.
because we've never, I mean, in the rare cases where we have used WDID numbers as part of a larger cert when we need to do WDRs in conjunction with it, I think we've always used the same WDID number in this region.
Really, how you used your WDID numbers is not, I think that the person who raised the question of that they've already entered the WDID, I interpreted that as her conveying to me that the application is already, for that same a specific project is already in the system, so we don't want to enter it again. It doesn't really, it wasn't specific to a WDID, that was just the way to flag that, yes, that project is already in the system.
So you're saying, I mean, but you're telling me is that the WID number is permit type specific, and that's new information to me. I've never heard that.
This is not really about how your specific regions issue or deal with their WDID, so I can't get further into that at this time.
I had a question about the mitigation. Now, anytime a credit is bought at a bank, we should be putting it in the established column?
I think that's a program question you guys have to answer in your core comms. Because...
Well, I guess I would just like an example of when you would use enhanced, when you'd use established, when you'd use preserved, or when you'd use restored. Because it seems like with a mitigation bank, it's almost could be looked at as a handful of those, almost established, preserved.
That's true.
Or enhanced, restored, and preserved, or even all four.
Okay.
Well, we'll address this and with the program, and probably the best thing to do is either address it at CoreComm or have a special webinar for us to address those sorts of questions. So if you want to email me directly, I can also get your answer for you.
Okay.
I had a quick question on the fees, fields, application fee received amount and the dredge fill fee. Is the application fee received amount the base 640 or whatever the new?
Everything, the application fee that you enter there should be whatever they've sent in, and it should match according to your fee calculator what you should be paying. So it's the whole thing.
And so, what's the dredge fill fee?
For those that get an annual fee, they are charged annually. It would be their whole fee. My understanding is that pretty much no search or WDRs issued are being charged annually. So at this point, you don't have to worry about it then.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Don't think we should do that in CoreComm too. Some of them are charged annually. It's a subset, but they are.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
I have a question about the 401 cert enrollee WDR part. I'm trying to figure out how to enter the projects we have that were pre-certified on the list of State Board's list of nationwide that were pre-certified.
That's a good question. Can we have a slide for that, so I'm going to hold that for that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so getting back to uploading our document, I just want to make sure to go out, browse your computer, find the document that represents the regulatory measure that you're entering into the system, and attach it to the record so it's complete. So now that we have entered our base regulatory measure, I wanted to these next two slides are to talk about some additional data entry that you may need to do. It doesn't go into a lot of detail, so if you're new to CWICS, you may not be able to follow along all the terms and procedures that I'm highlighting here, but you can go to our business rules or our data entry processes and our other recorded webinars for more information on doing these procedures. So the first one is what if your certification is amended, and we have a an amendments table in the regulatory measure on the general info tab that you would fill in, just saying when it was amended and if it has a specific number associated to that. And then you go to your impacts and mitigation table, assuming that was part of the amendment that was made, and update that information. The next one is, what if your regulatory measure is no longer active? And again, you go back to the base regulatory measure like the one we just created. You change the status to historical and add a termination date. And then that flags it as saying we're no longer actively regulating this site or this project. If you go out and do an inspection, you want to make sure you record that into SWRCB. So you create an inspection record using the inspection wizard. So you go to SWRCB, there's a module for inspections, and you say you want to create a new one. The first thing it's going to ask you is if it's a regulated site. Was the inspection of a regulated site? You want to answer yes. You go out and search for the base regulatory measure, like the one that we just entered. And by doing that, a lot of the links that need to be made in that inspection record are already completed, and there are just a couple additional fields that you need to fill out. Similarly, for violation
status for a second. You asked about, or you said that we need to enter in historical once the cert is no longer valid. Do we need to be keeping track of those that are expiring and then entering that information?
I believe that you should, because as the water board, I think we should be able to say what sites we're actually regulating. But it gets somewhat into programmatic, like what that actually means. If there's still ongoing mitigation, does that mean the certification is still open? And I'm not in the position to answer that, but as somebody who works in SWRCB, I think it's a good idea to, again, know what we're actively regulating. And so I recommend that you do go back and do that updating of the record so we know what.
I hope you realize you're implying a massive extra workload, because every 5 years, all the nationwides sunset. So we'd have to go through every 5 years and determine which of the nationwides that we certified have sunsetted.
Comment noted. I don't. Go back to violations. You create violations using the violation wizard. You can either do that from the violation module, or if it's associated with an inspection, there's a tab in the inspection module for alleged inspection violations. And again, you get more of a wizard format, so you get prompted as to what to enter, and a lot of the links are already made for you by either starting with the inspection or selecting the base regulatory measure, such as the one we just entered. Similarly, with enforcement actions, we have an enforcement action wizard that you access from the violation module. And so if you have a violation and then write a subsequent staff enforcement letter or NOV for it, you want to start on the violation record that led to that enforcement action. And again, the links will be made for you.
This is Valerie from Region 4. Is there any ability to connect pictures to those modules?
Like I just showed in the regulatory measure module, you would just put your pictures in a format that, basically SWRCB can accept most formats, so you just want to make sure other people will be able to access the format that you use. So like you can paste them into Word and obviously upload them into either the inspection module or the regulatory measure module. Those would be your most likely places. So now we're going to go on to some, not necessarily troubleshooting, but maybe questions or issues you have on some of your situations that you'll have to enter for. If your project falls into multiple counties, how do you enter it? At this point in time, SWRCB can only associates one county with one place. And so if the project, which we're representing by the place record, falls into multiple counties, you really just have to select the primary county that's impacted. If you think they're all impacted very much the same. Just pick one and note in the description field that it falls into many counties. Similarly, with if the project has multiple locations, what latitude or longitude do I enter? And again, SWRCB has a setup for entering in one latitude-longitude pair for a place record, again, which we represent by the project. So you just have to pick a representative one. It's preferred that if one is provided in the application, or one or more are provided in the application, that you use one that's actually provided. So at least you have an idea of the general location of it. What if the site is also regulated under the construction stormwater permit? Where do I do my data entry? We have these rules written down on the SMARTS page of the SWRCB intranet, but basically, if you do an inspection that checks compliance with both the stormwater construction permit and your certification, you would put inspection records in both systems. If you find violations of both the construction stormwater permit and your certification, you would put violation records in both systems. However, if you write an enforcement action that references both of those violations, you have to pick at that point where the enforcement record should be created, and that should go off, again, this idea of a primary, where it has primary impacts. If the most egregious violations were of the stormwater permit, you should put it in SMARTS. Alternatively, you would put it in SWRCB. So there is some gray area there. All certifications are considered to be covered by General Order 2003-0017-DWQ. Do I need to create that enrollee record in SWRCB for every certification? And the answer is no, because it's essentially a permit by rule that every time you do it, it's in effect. We are not getting any additional information by you entering that information, so it is not required, and you shouldn't actually do it. So I received notification of a project being done under RPG 5 for repair and protection activities in emergency situations. What do I enter into SWRCB? And so I think this is at least touching on that question we got about the regional general permits that have undergone state board certification. In this case, you enter it as an enrollee under a general certification. So the RPG 5 would be entered into SWRCB as a general certification, and then you put it in as an enrollee under that. In RPG 5, I think there's a couple other ones that are just like that. So in those situations, again, you put it as an enrollee under a general certification. Then there are situations like, I can't think of the number right now, but there's a certification issued for the San Diego County with a bunch of projects they're going to do for flood control. In that case, that should be entered in as a individual certification because the projects are actually known. It's just over a long 5-year period in which they're going to do them. And there is additional guidance about this in our data entry processes, and I'll show you those in a second when I go into the SWRCB intranet site. I'm actually not going to go into reports too much right now because of time, but I do want to highlight there's a wetlands and certification, actually 2 reports specific to this program to display impacts and mitigation. And then also we're going to, if you just wanted to know how many regulatory measures were out there for this program, either certifications or WDRs related to the Wetlands and Certification Program, you could just do a regulatory measure search and export it into Excel and sort it or filter it, and that would be one way to get the data. We also have a number of other reports in SWRCB. Those are just the 2 that I thought would be interesting. And again, through your regulatory measure search, you could use a number of criteria to do your sorting or filtering on. So into finding additional information, we both talked about the SWRCB intranet, so I do want to show you where that is. So if you just go to WaterNet, on the front page here we have SWRCB, and here is the SWRCB intranet site. I said that the rules for where data goes in, if it's both a construction stormwater site and a 401 site, you can read about those on the SMARTS page. What is SMARTS? More information, this one right here. And then we have our instructional processes. And I mentioned two different processes for that. We have general certification enrollee entry, and that's the one I just mentioned with the RPG 5, and then, thank you, wetlands and certification regulatory measure entry. That's more, goes along the process that we just did in entering our 401 certification. So those, again, are listed as business processes. They're step-by-step instructions on how to do the data entry. But while I'm here, also I want to point out where you can find other recorded webinars. You go to the training page and then the SWRCB section of the webinars page. Here we have either presentations or actually the recorded webinars for entering inspections and violations, which I talked about earlier. Also, if you have additional questions, you can contact Catherine or I. Do you want to highlight some future webinars? The first two are for Discover, which is an ad hoc reporting tool. They are actually specialized for those who have accounts in Discover, so it's not a general audience. But then the third one, Violation Wizard, it will talk about how to use our enhanced violation wizard to do data entry, and that is probably more applicable, hopefully, to you, and you guys can attend that on November 10th. And now we'll open it up for more questions. We do understand that we're to the end of our hour, so you may have to drop off, but we will stay here to answer additional questions. We have come into a lot of more programmatic questions, and we can still try to answer some of them, but as we mentioned, I think a good idea that we'll follow up with is having special either discussions in their core comm or having additional webinars specific to more programmatic questions.
Hey, Sharma, I got a question regarding latitude and longitude and any GIS capability. Is it planned, or does anything exist currently? Because that would go a long way to, I'm assuming, help track what net impacts are, or guaranteeing loss.
That's really planned as part of Wetland Tracker and the online application, and so we're using SWRCB kind of in the interim, but are not planning to recreate that functionality here.
Thank you.
Jarma, this is Bill. I just had a quick point of information on Mitigation Banks. When you purchase credits, you'll purchase either creation credits, restoration credits, or preservation credits or enhancement credits. So you'll know what type of credit you're purchasing from the bank.
Okay, good. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. And I wanted to mention that, as I stated in the beginning of our presentation, that we will be contacting all of those that were on the webinar today with information about the wiki communication tool that we're going to actually open up to everybody in the program for, having discussions about your questions and sharing information with one another about the wizard and how we do our data entry. And so some of the program-specific questions that we have can also be addressed in that manner as well.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Gary, Jarma, this is Gary. I was giving my staff a heads-up training yesterday before this, And I have a question regarding the statuses, reg measure statuses.
Yes.
The wizard has lots of them, or a couple extras like denied without prejudice and so forth. And I was, however, if you go into just CWIX and reg measure search.
Yeah, all those that are listed in the wizard as reg measure statuses aren't actually reg measure statuses. I didn't go into it because it's a little confusing, but
is that a task status?
Yeah. So we have here this list, as Gary noted, looks a little different than the status menu or status drop-down that we saw in the wizard itself, because we don't see denied or denied without prejudice or withdrawn. But if we go to this additional tab, and which I didn't feel we had time to go into, but when we were going through it, but I'll go back to this tab that's called tasks. It represents things that the water board staff have to do. And remember, we entered the public notice date, and now automatically there's an actual date for the date that we entered, and the status says performed. Then we have this task of NOI, ROWD NOI processing outcome. And it says requirements adopted, meaning that, even though it's a certification, it was issued, but it should be read as whatever regulatory measure went through and was issued. Here is where you see denied and denied without prejudice. If in the wizard you pick denied or denied without prejudice, it will automatically set this task with the appropriate task status and make the regulatory measure status never active. And same thing with withdrawn.
Thanks, Dharma.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for attending. We will be following up with some additional information. It sounds like there's definitely some more information that needs to go out. So thank you for asking your questions and attending, and hopefully you'll attend in the future. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
This is